All right, so this is the Hydropower Coffee Hour, and we're talking about economics, electric power markets, and the corporate owners of Connecticut River Hydropower, and specifically focusing on projects at Turner's Falls, Northfield, Vernon, Bellows Falls, and Wilder. I want to just give full credit. This has really been a collaborative effort with me, Kathy, and Andrea, and also two undergraduates, Will Ryan and Jesse William, who provided a lot of the background research, and graduate student Vicente Pereira, and my political science colleague Regine Spector also helped with some of the aspects. Now I have to get my slideshow to forward. So this is just an outline of what we're going to be covering. I try not to read all the words on the slide because my experience as a professor is that people read the words on the slide themselves, and so it takes more time if I do it for you. So I'll do it sometimes, but not all the time. All right, first section, who are the owners of the 5 Connecticut River hydropower projects undergoing relicensing? Here are the 5 projects. So this is the Connecticut River in the middle. These are the 5 projects. 3 of them are owned by Great River Hydro, Wilder, Bellows Falls, and Vernon. 2 of them are owned by First Light, Northfield, and Turner's Falls. Since electric restructuring in the 1990s to early 2000s, corporate ownership of electric companies has changed frequently and become increasingly complex, and these 2 companies are no exception. So part of the story of who owns these projects has to do with this change in corporate structure of electric companies. So First Light owns the projects that are shown in the map, and the 4 circled projects are the Turner's Falls and Northfield projects. If you're wondering why there are 4, there are 2 different hydro projects at Turner's, and there's also a solar power field at Northfield, which is shown on this map. First Light says it's a New England-based diversified clean energy provider and steward of more than 14,000 acres and hundreds of miles of shoreline along some of our region's most beautiful rivers and lakes. This is true, and it's also the case that it's a complex corporation. Here's a timeline of corporate ownership. Previous to restructuring, it was part of a utility. Then it was bought in 2006, and that company packaged the assets that were on the map into First Light. That was sold once and again in 2016 to PSP Investments, which is a Canadian federal government pension fund. And this is just a brief blurb about PSP Investments, so you get a sense of its global scope. And it's providing pensions for public employees in Canada. All right, First Light itself has also restructured and become even more of an extended family. It produced several children, one limited liability corporation for Northfield and one for Turner's Falls. And why a limited liability company? So this is going to be true of Great River Hydro, so we're not picking on First Light here. But limited liability means that the owners, that is the parent company and the investors, are not liable for the company's debts or liabilities. So you can't use the assets of the owners to satisfy the debts of the company. It's a separate legal entity that can sue or be sued, purchase and sell property, lend and invest money through its company name separate from the parent company. The LLC does not have to pay taxes itself. Instead, the owners report profits as part of their income, and then they pay the taxes. And it can create budget constraints in regulatory context that may protect the larger institution and owners, because one LLC maybe have very limited revenue, and it can then argue that it doesn't have the financial wherewithal to pay for regulatory burdens. This is the current structure of First Light. So you can see there's a whole family branch now that has Northfield, another family branch that has Turner's and the solar. All right, here's Great River Hydro. These are all the projects that Great River Hydro owns on the Deerfield and Connecticut rivers. And And it's also got a story of corporate ownership change from starting when it was a utility being sold in '98 to TransCanada, then to now ArcLight, which is also an investment firm, although a private equity firm, not a pension fund. And this is based in Boston. Interestingly, the front page of ArcLight has a picture of one of the Great River Hydro projects on its head web page, and this is from the 15 Miles Falls projects, not one of the ones we're talking about today. But ArcLight itself is very much bigger and broader than just Connecticut and Deerfield River Hydro. So this gives you some sense of the things that they invest in. So in summary, both First Light and Great River Hydro are subsidiaries today of giant investment companies. They are either LLCs or a family of LLCs. And because of the above, they have limited publicly available financial information. So for example, no publicly available annual reports. So all the information that we've gathered on finances have had to come from someplace else. So how do these facilities make money? And how does this affect the river? So there are 5 main sources of income. One is the ISO New England energy markets. So ISO New England is the operator of the electric grid in New England, and it covers the 6 states of New England, actually not the very northern part of Maine, but 5.5 states. And I have an asterisk here just to make sure we get some vocabulary straight. So energy is flows of electric power in this ISO and common terminology. Capacity, which we'll talk about soon, is how much something is able to produce at once. Electric markets include both. And when you see units, MW is megawatts, and MW is capacity or instantaneous flow, and MW hours or megawatt hours are the amount of electricity per hour. So back up here, how do you sell on an energy market? You sell on one of 2 markets, either a day-ahead market or a real-time market. You produce energy by releasing water through generation turbines. And Northfield actually consumes more energy than it produces. We'll talk about why in a few minutes. But it makes money by consuming energy when energy prices are low and generating energy when prices are high. All right, so how do these things work? So we have 3 different kinds of facilities among these 5 projects. So the first is a conventional hydropower dam, and that's Vernon and Wilder. So this is the river, upriver of the dam. This is the river, downriver of the dam. During hours that prices are low, the dam retains water in the reservoir. When prices go high, it releases water through the dam into the river below, and that moves the turbines and generates electricity. So what that does to the river is the river goes on and off in flow. And so this is a graph that shows water flow on this axis and days going across here, June 15th, 16th, 17th, 18th, and 19th. This is this year. And you can see here it's going at 2,000 cubic feet per second. And then it jumps up to over 7,000. That's when it's generating power. Jumps down again, jumps up, jumps down, jumps up. This is very typical of what's called Hydra Peaking. And that means it's going up and down daily or twice daily, usually. Then there's a hydropower dam with a large extended mill canal. These mill canals really date from the pre-electricity era when our New England factories were powered directly by water power. But they have a new purpose in the modern electric age, that what they do is they allow water to travel down sometimes a 2-mile long canal while the river continues to drop. And as a result, when the water does finally get to the generator, it has farther to fall. So that's important because electricity generation is proportional to the distance water falls. So it actually generates more power and therefore more money by having the water go down this canal. The problem is the river is left with no water for that distance. In Turner's, there is an extra outlet where some of the water comes through a smaller generator. And so that really mitigates the problem by having some water flow through this part, but there's still a part with no water coming in from the generators at all. And this part has obviously less than further down. The third type is pump storage. So this is a diagram that comes from the US Department of Energy. So what's going on here is here's the river up here. The dam keeps the level of this river high. And then below is Turner's, which we've already seen. So when prices are low, these upside down lightning bolts are meant to show consumption of electricity. So when prices are low, Northfield uses electricity to pump water uphill. And you remember how water is proportional to the height that it has to travel. This is about 1,000 feet high. So that's a lot of electricity it has to consume. But then when prices are high, it releases that water back down and now it generates electricity. It actually generates less than it consumes, but because it's producing energy at a time the grid needs it, when prices are high, it's good for the grid and they make more money. All right, it creates a slightly different pattern in terms of water flows. This is flows not below the dam because Northfield is taking out of the reservoir rather than changing what's happening over the dam. But so this is water level now, not flows. And when it pumps up the hill, the water in the reservoir goes down. And when it generates, that's water dropping from the top of the hill into the river, so the river level goes up. So you get a cycle of pumping, generating, pumping, generating, pumping, generating, pumping. This can be especially problematic when prices are especially low or high, or something else is going on with the market that makes the bids that Northfield has offered particularly good for the grid. And in this case, this was a very recent event in June when there was an extreme rate and duration of pumping that went all the way from about midnight to like 8 a.m. And the levels reached almost 4 feet below the lowest height in the previous slide. So it was extremely low water levels. And this got covered in the local paper because boats couldn't even access Barton Cove. So second way that these projects can make money is in the capacity market. And the capacity market, again, is based on how much energy they can produce on an instantaneous basis at the maximum. So the nameplate capacity basically means this is like if you go to buy a car and it gives you the energy efficiency standard, it might not actually be the exact same as when you actually drive it. So this is at the dealership, what are they offering? They tell you the nameplate capacity. So the thing that we really wanted to emphasize here is just how huge Northfield's generation is compared to the other projects. But all of these are considered large hydro. Then a third kind of ISO market are reserves and regulation markets. And these income is earned for availability to turn on electricity rapidly. And hydropower is especially good at this. So this is one of the things to understand about hydropower's interactions with the electric market is a lot of resources, nuclear and coal, they can't go up and down on short time frames. But at hydropower operations, they can close the gates, open the gates to allow water through or not in a very short amount of time. So they're really good at this kind of thing. More at reserves, this kind of 10 to 30 minute than at regulation speed usually. A fourth way they earn money is through state renewable energy credits. In these systems, extra payments are received for generation that fits the state's renewable portfolio standards, one of the 6 states of New England. Vernon is the only one that qualifies for the sale of renewable energy credits in Massachusetts because it is certified as low impact hydropower. Turner's, Bellows, and Wilder are not certified and they cannot sell RECs in Massachusetts, but they can sell under other states' rules in other states. And Northfield cannot sell RECs because it uses more energy than it generates. The fifth way that they can earn money is with bilateral contracts. This is instead of going into the open competitive wholesale market, they sign a deal with someone who's going to buy a certain amount of energy for a certain amount of time. And that's that, often at a certain price. Sometimes it's pinned to the market, sometimes it's just given. So both companies have recently signed bilateral contracts. This is First Light in November. It made a deal with a bunch of municipal utilities. It's going to sell them 200,000 megawatt hours per year for 10 years. It'll come from the Turners Falls and Cabot generating facilities. Those are the two that I showed earlier that are both on that canal. And First Light says this is clean, locally produced, and low-cost power that will help support more than 110 great jobs in Western Massachusetts. The more recent one is Great River Hydro signed a contract to sell to Green Mountain Power. That's Vermont's largest utility. They're going to sell 145,000 megawatt hours in 2023, and it will increase over time for 30 years. It's going to come from all of their Connecticut and Deerfield projects. And Green Mountain Power says this is clean, cost-effective, local, and reliable power. They do have the caveat that it is subject to the Public Utility Commission approval. All right, so those are the 5 main ways. Oh, I should say one thing about these bilateral contracts. These aren't in addition to sales in the market. Like each of these projects, with the exception of Northfield, has a certain amount of generation it can produce each year based on the water that's coming downstream. And it's either going to generate for the market or it's going to generate for a contract. It can't just add them on top of each other indefinitely. All right, how much money do these facilities make? So we have to give you caveats in the beginning. There is no public reporting of annual revenue and expenditures for these LLCs. You can't just go onto an annual report and find the information you need. We have information from the company's FERC license applications from 2016 and 2020. And there are also property tax assessments from local towns that actually have to figure out what the income is for each of the projects. In some cases, if the company challenges the property tax assessment, they may also come up with their own assessment. So we're only going to give you one view of all of this in a minute, but what you should understand the background is we spent at least 2 months trying to figure out what the income was because there's so many different data sources and they all conflict. But here's what we have from the company's data submitted to the license applications. So Wilder, Bellows, and Vernon. And I used the same icons you saw earlier. So I'm just going to give you a minute to look at this and sort of get your head around what I'm showing with this graph. You can tell me whether I drove you crazy by adding the little icons on the graph. All right, so just a few comments you might notice. Energy is the largest portion on each of these. Vernon comes in with a pretty significant amount of money that comes from RECs. And remember, it's the only one that can sell RECs in Massachusetts. All right, and the maximum you're seeing of any bar is about 14 million. So then we come to Turners and Northfield. So a couple of things really stand out here. First of all, the numbers are higher, especially at Northfield. And secondly, capacity just suddenly dominates at Northfield. You remember how it has a capacity of over 1,000 megawatts, so it can sell that on a yearly basis to the New England ISO and earn quite a bit of money. And then thirdly, you can see those little fast guys. So they are selling to the reserves market with a fair bit of ability to make money off of that. All right, so the next question is, how do these companies use their money to influence government policy and practice so they can make more money? And I want to say that we're not trying to say that influencing government policy to make more money is necessarily bad. If they are influencing government policy to incentivize producing benefits for the electric grid in ways that are also good for rivers, we're all for it. So, but the basic idea is the project earns money, That money can then be used to influence government at several levels. If it's local, they're trying to reduce their costs. If it's state, they're trying to change how they earn money. And if it's federal, they're often trying to change how they actually operate the plant itself. So first, local. So the main issue here is property taxes. So this is one of the highest amounts of taxes. The federal and state taxes don't even show up because it's paid at the corporate level, but property taxes have to get paid. So what does the company want to do? It wants to try to reduce its local costs by reducing its taxes. So this is just an illustration of some tax disputes where First Light actually challenged each of the 4 towns in Massachusetts where First Light has property. Every single one of these towns, First Light challenged their tax assessment. In many cases, it lasted for 4 or 5 years. And in at least 2 of the cases, the towns ended up reimbursing First Light some money. The 4th town, it's still in a dispute, so we don't know what the results are. In Vermont and New Hampshire, it's even more complicated. There are dozens of towns that have Great River Hydro property. So these are just some examples of how Great River Hydro challenged flowage rights, which is amount of money that they have to pay in order to flood property with their reservoirs. So a second way is to try to change what's happening in the state and the ISO. And what they're trying to do there is they want to change markets and mandates to incentivize the kind of electricity and other products that they can produce. So what we do know is there's public records on lobbying in all in these states. And so here's First Light's lobbying in Massachusetts. We added numbers for GDF Suez, which used to own First Light, although they may be lobbying for other things because they had other properties as well. But you can see this was up to $250,000 that they were spending on lobbying. And then Great River lobbying is a smaller amount. They also lobby in Massachusetts because, for example, Vernon can sell its RECs in Massachusetts. Massachusetts policy matters to Great River Hydro. And they've also lobbied in Vermont and New Hampshire. So what are they lobbying on? Well, here's some things we know. Oftentimes we don't know the details. But First Light commented on Massachusetts clean energy standards. These are brand new standards since 2017 that allow companies that make non-carbon emitting or low carbon emitting energy able to get clean energy RECs. So instead of renewable energy credits, they're clean energy credits. And under the most recent 2020 ones, there's kind of something called clean existing energy standards and credits. And those include even nuclear power as well as existing hydro. So, but in the Massachusetts new regulations, there was a rule that if you'd been selling RECs out of state, you couldn't then sell clean energy credits in Massachusetts. And First Light said, we think that exemption should not exist so that we could be able to sell our clean energy credits in Massachusetts. There was a climate roadmap law passed this past January, and First Light supported that. And they may have been active, but we don't know, with the New England Power Generators Association. Both companies are members of this consortium of generators. That consortium lobbied against Hydro-Quebec imports in 2015 to 16. So perhaps they were active, but we don't know that. They're also likely trying to shape ISO markets, but we have no way to know that either. There's no public information on that, but they may be trying to encourage a carbon tax that would favor hydropower. They may be trying to end the minimum offer price rule that has been very controversial, that restricts participation in the capacity market for renewable energy benefiting from RECs. Finally, they can try to influence federal government policy. Until recently, that would mainly only have been through licensing, but right now there's a lot happening in FERC regulations with the new administration, so there may be some effort there as well now. So they might be trying to change, we don't know the details, but they're probably going to be trying to change things in their license to lower their costs and produce more profits. And then they might be trying to change national energy or FERC policies, perhaps to change the licensing rules in ways that might favor them. They might be trying to help a carbon tax. They might be trying to end this minimum offer price rule through the FERC rules. Sorry, I need to close my window.
Your real window as opposed to your computer's window.
All right, it's still noisy because my other one's open. Ah, hold on.
It's okay, Eve. It's not that bad.
That's as good as it's gonna get. All right. Andrea, I'm gonna send it to you and then I've got a final concluding slide. Oh, sorry, Kathy.
Yeah, no worries. Okay, so we wanted to present this just as an example of some of the revenues and costs. This information comes directly, this is Great River Hydro only. So these are the 3 projects up in Vermont and New Hampshire. And this information comes from the final application, which was submitted in 2017 to FERC, and then the amended final license application, which was submitted this last December to FERC. And so the first column there, you'll see on the left, there's Wilder, Bellows Falls, and Vernon. That second column, I guess, is the revenue reported in essentially 2016 dollars for those 3 facilities. And so the total revenue for those 3 facilities in 2016 was, about 27 million. They also have to include their operating costs. And what they include in operating costs, it also includes depreciation. So we feel, what they put here for operating costs is probably on the high end. But so what they list as operating costs is around 23 million. So in 2016, as an example, those 3 facilities had a net revenue or profit of just about $4 million. If you move over to the next column, this is what they reported for 2019 revenue. And again, for the 3 altogether, it's about 33 million. Again, their operating cost is around 24 million, they stated. And so you have a net revenue of about 9 million in that year. And then the last column on the right is actually Great River Hydro is changing their operating process. As Eve was explaining, they have been peaking facilities and they're changing to what is more run of river. So they'll be getting more money from straight electrical generation and less from the peaking and capacity going forward, assuming this is approved in their license. But even so, you see the amounts are very similar. So what they did is they took the 2019 year and they created an estimate based on what it would look like if they were operating in this new way. And so you see very similarly, they still would have made around 33 million in revenue. Operating costs are the same. And so the net revenue is about 8 million. So they stated in their application that under this new operating regime, they're going to lose, possibly in this year, 2019, it was about -1%. So it's not costing them very much at all to make this operational change. So for context, they're required to develop protection, mitigation, and enhancement measures over the course of the next 40 years to essentially reinvest in our communities, invest in recreation, respond to cultural and archaeological considerations. And so what they have put forward in their application amounts to what would be $877,000 a year over the next 40 years. So you can clearly see they are still going to be making plenty of money if this is what's approved. And obviously we're arguing that they can afford to provide more investments to mitigate for the impacts of the facilities in our communities. And with that, I'll pass it over to Andrea if you had some final things to say.
Yeah, we were scrambling a little bit at the last minute to do a kind of comparison of revenue versus expenses for First Light. I do have a couple of slides that I could put on the screen if okay, yeah, let me share my screen. These have not been formatted all that great, and there were two graphs kind of put on top of each other, but this is Turner's Falls. The brown and the yellow are the revenues, which are the yellow is energy revenue, the brown is capacity revenue, and then there's some teeny little slices in 2019 for renewable energy credits. The blue shows the expenses that First Light reported in their 2016 and then 2020 final license applications. These expenses, there's no way to really verify, whether they're real or not. They're probably somewhat inflated. And then the salmon colored part is what First Light has said they will be spending in the future on mitigation and enhancement at this project. So it doesn't represent an actual expense in 2019. It just gives you a little bit of a sense of the slice and the size compared to their revenues. Similarly, for Northfield Mountain, this facility makes a lot more money. Their expenses, for some reason, went way up in 2019. And again, this is likely an inflated number. But you can see that their mitigation enhancement pledge is teeny. And in fact, almost all of it is for dredging the upper reservoir because it fills up with sediment, and that we don't regard that as an enhancement. That's just operation and maintenance of their facility.
I think the other important thing to point out here between Northfield Mountain and the other facilities is the scale, right? So Turner's and the three facilities in Vermont, New Hampshire are working on like 30 million, where maybe there's going to be 6 to 10 million in profit, something like that. Northfield Mountain, the revenue is $150 million. So the scale of how Northfield Mountain is affected by the ISO is much different. And the other thing that was important is that because Northfield Mountain is a separate LLC from Turner's Falls, they will not be able to use, they will argue that they wouldn't be able to use the profits from Northfield Mountain to mitigate under Turner's Falls because it's a separate LLC, which may be why they actually separated them just about last year or so.
Yeah, and you can see from 2013 to 2019, the capacity market brought in a lot more money for Northfield Mountain in 2019 than 2013. That was the reason for the huge increase. I'm going to stop sharing.
So we're glad to answer any questions to the best of our ability.
I have a very short concluding slide to share.
Oh, go for it.
Let's see. I have to remember how to share screen. So just a few concluding thoughts, that private sector companies ought to be able to make money. That's really important. That's what they're here for. And that's a contribution. And what they do is a contribution to all of us making electricity. but they ought to be able to make money in ways that also help the river, or at least don't hurt it very much. And there are ways to do that and to help river communities. Secondly, that there ought to be some contributions that are proportional to earnings. They are going to impact the river and the communities around the river in significant ways, one way or another. And that should be recognized with some proportional contributions, especially if they're able to get policies that enable them to earn more money out of those operations. And finally, information transparency makes much of this really difficult. And the more information that can be shared openly, the more there can be honest and collaborative conversations about how to have win-win solutions for everyone. That's all I've got.
So feel free to, we're trying to answer questions in the chat as they come up, so we can try to answer questions there. If you are an introvert, if you're an extrovert, feel free to unmute and shout it out. And
hey, how's it going? This is John T here. I actually sent you all a few pictures of when the river was fairly low on that event in early June in Gill. Is there anything else that you might have found out as why the river actually went so low? I've actually heard some rumors that someone at Northfield Mountain Project, they actually have a human who kind of verifies the level as it's going down. I actually heard rumors that someone fell asleep while monitoring that level. Not sure if there was any other information that might have came out.
Well, FERC did ask them to respond to, they had received a complaint about this event, and they did file an explanation that was lacking in a lot of details, but and then they had a public statement that indicated that they had been dispatched by ISO New England. We don't know exactly what that means. Eva, you kind of looked into this, but
I can just say,
yeah.
Basically dispatched means that they bid into one or another of the markets, and we don't have any way to know which market that they bid into, but they had a standing bid and it crossed the price clearing threshold, and ISO said, okay, you've now got to do what you bid to do. And if they hadn't done it at that point, they would have faced serious fines.
I have a quick
They did
question.
say that they were within their license parameters, and that was kind of their answer to FERC. Didn't really explain what had happened. They have told me that they're interested in doing better communication when this happens in the future, which makes me a little worried that they're, going to be drawing it down more frequently, because their license application, they're asking to use more of the upper reservoir for Northfield Mountain than they have in the past. So because Northfield Mountain was originally built to actually capture some water during spring freshet and then feed it into Quabbin Reservoir for drinking water supply for Boston, and that connection with Quabbin never happened, but the extra capacity is sitting there. So it's like there's more space in the bathtub to fill up the bathtub, but they're not going to be raising Turner's Falls Dam more, so they'll be using just potentially more water in the Connecticut River in and out.
Hey, Andrea, I can chime in a little bit about this. Hi,
Sure.
John. It's Greg Snedeker with the Gill Select Board. John Ward is also here, so he's familiar with this as well. I also live right on the river, so I watch the raising and lowering of the water daily. And they have a range that they can work within, and they sometimes go to their extremes. So they will lower the water down, especially on like Sunday mornings. You see it, and when they're hitting peak load. But what I've seen recently is, since there was some bad publicity on this, is that they have adjusted their ranges. So what they've done is they have now, instead of working from sort of a medium level and then taking the water level down to more of the lower limit of what they can do, meaning drawing more up into the reservoir, they're actually keeping it at a higher level now, meaning that these are levels that we see in April when we have a lot of runoff and snow melt. So we're seeing now the level hitting that upper watermark in terms of where the high watermark is when they release, and they're lower and they're drawing probably about the same amount, but it's just not going down as far. So they have control over this. I agree. We do need to have better communication because they don't really let people know. I mean, those of us that live on the river understand and sort of know when these things are going to happen. Hot days, weekends when people are running their air conditioners and things like that. But when they receive bad publicity, you definitely see a change in how they operate. So just to keep that in mind, that when people do speak up and when they make complaints to FERC, that there is adjustments in how they operate. And I'll just say one thing that I know Steve Ellis left, but he and I have talked a number of times about the concern of the split off with the two LLCs. There's two concerns. One is the tax implications in terms of how the assessments are going to be derived. And then also what you brought up, which is their ability to fund their, especially the Turner's Falls, the responsibilities that they have in terms of being able to keep up with their updates. Now, we talked to Len, I think it was Len Green, who assured us that they were not, that this was just more of a business move, and that it was not going to impact their ability to fund their responsibilities. But it's still a concern. So, and the tax assessments for Gill and Montague, I think, are definitely a major concern. We don't know where they're going to fall. One of the things they can do when they apply pressure is they can, like they did, they basically took us to the appellate tax board for 4 or 5 years in a row. What that does is that puts enormous strain on the town because we have to beef up our overlay accounts. And so we're sitting on money that we can't use. And they're sitting on money that they have, as you saw, they have lots of it, and they have lots of lawyers, and they can draw it out to the point where the towns just cannot afford it. And so it's it's a little underhanded, and so what they're doing is they basically strong arm us into accepting their assessments, and it's frustrating. So I'll leave it at that. Great presentation, though. Thank you. I learned a lot about some of the nitty gritty.
Thanks, Greg.
We have a hand up from, it says Bob Zealiff's iPad.
Hi, Kathy. It's actually Suzanne.
Hey, Suzanne.
How are you doing? So quick question is I signed for the FERC docket number to track it. I don't know the docket number. Do you know that offhand, and what the status is, when it'll be open for public comment?
Yeah, I'll stick.
And
the
if you just want
docket
to email
numbers.
it to me, that's fine.
Great. I'll put them in the chat too.
Okay.
We also have on our website a page on hydropower, and it has the project numbers for these facilities on there and a little bit more information on how to comment.
Okay,
We don't know
'cause I
exactly
think
when the comment period is going to open up for the license applications. We think probably later this summer. People can file things with FERC whenever they want. It goes into the docket, but in order to be considered an official comment for the license application, it's good to do it during that comment period.
Okay, great. Thank you. Yeah, I was just on your page looking. Do you know exactly where? Because I was just on your page looking for it.
We can put the
Maybe-
link.
I'm sorry to take up time. If somebody else wants to speak, I can figure this out by myself. Go ahead. There's limited time. Thank you.
Can I answer Kevin's question about why revenue might have jumped?
Sure.
So I don't know the answer to that. So Kevin asked, why did the revenue jump so much between 2016 and 19? I don't know the answer to that, but there are several different reasons. One is for the 4 projects that are not Northfield, a high water year means more revenue, right? There's just more electricity to generate if there's more water in the river.
Yeah, 2016 was a drought, so that's one reason.
Second reason is that electricity prices can change. Most of the time, electricity prices on the wholesale market are sold based on what is the marginal last kind of generation that's added in the auction, and that's usually natural gas. So natural gas is usually the price setter in terms of electricity generation. So anyway, so if the natural gas prices is going up and down, then electricity prices can go up and down. And then thirdly, the capacity market, there's an auction once a year. Everybody bids, here's how much capacity I want to provide. ISO figures out how much capacity it needs. Once all the bids come in, they get stacked up by cost, this much is needed. That can change, and capacity prices have been changing every year. So that's the third thing that could change those graphs really dramatically.
So we have another.
Also, the Great River Hydro facilities reported some renewable energy credits in the later year that they didn't have in the earlier year.
There's a question in the chat from Christine. When the licensing agreement parameters conflict with minimum flow requirements, which one wins out? And then also, which fine is greater if both violations carry a fine?
You take the first half of that, I'll take the second half.
Well, I'm not sure what you mean by minimum flow. They did pass they were passing water for fish passage at the dam during this time of low water. So they actually did not violate any of their license parameters. And they're proposing to keep the same license parameter for the range that they can use as measured at the Turner's Falls Dam. So, you know, that's a comment that it could be made to FERC that they should not be allowed to draw down that far because, you know, you can't even use the river. I don't think they like going down that low because they've told me that if they draw down the elevation below 179 as mean sea level, they can't put water into the canal, and they went down to 177. So I think this was not a desirable thing for them. You know, that might add to the rumor about the falling asleep thing, but I think somehow they messed up a little. I don't know whether that rumor is true or whether it was some other mistake.
I'll just add similarly for Great River Hydro that, you know, I think for Northfield, it's a 9-foot differential between, you know, where they operate in. For Great River Hydro, it's a 5-foot. The license allows 5 feet. They generally operate in a 2 to 3 foot range, but they are allowed 5 feet because of certain emergency situations and things like that. But yeah, we agree that that distance should be minimized in the new license for all the projects.
I guess part of what I was asking was kind of a theoretical question too, about like, if you were to either violate the agreement you made to sell power, or you were going to violate the ecological parameters of your license, which one would hurt you most economically? Because my guess is that that's the one, whichever one hurts you least bad economically is the one you would do as the company. And who's going to suffer more, the company or the river? And then after me, I think Glenn is in stack.
Yeah, so
I was going to say, to answer that question, Christine, at least a little bit though, is they're completely independent. You know, those both fines and regulatory systems exist completely independent of each other, which is part of the problem with hydropower. The energy side is one world and the environmental side is another world. And so clearly what they chose to do at this particular moment is go to the extremes of what the license allowed while meeting what the ISO demanded that they had bid on. But, you know, what's interesting is that they feel able to bid, you know, at that level, right? They feel able to bid in a way that's going to potentially make them go that low if the bid gets met.
And I don't think we know what the fines are, if there are any. You know, I've seen Great River Hydro periodically reports deviations from their license parameter for the Deerfield project. And, you know, there's various reasons, equipment malfunction and that sort of thing. So they write a letter to FERC saying this happened for a certain number of time and here's why. And then FERC will write back saying, you know, okay, not a violation of your license or something. So I think oftentimes they're not fined. It's just, you know, a little blip.
On
Glenn,
the ISO side, the fines are fairly well, you can figure out what the fines are and they're very large.
Yeah, and both
Very
of
large.
these facilities, the fines were constructed at the ISO for what you would call like non-very functioning facilities. Both of these companies have very good functioning facilities, so it would be very unlikely that they are going to put themselves in a position to be fined by the ISO. Like they will bid in a way that they know they can meet their needs without violating their license. So it's very unlikely they're going to be fined by the ISO. So, you know, and for the enforcement process for FERC, if they, you know, typically if they violate one of the license articles, as Andrea said, they put a letter explaining what happened, and it's generally assumed to be okay. There is an enforcement process, but the policy of FERC is to kind of, you know, work through a conversation about what occurred. You know, there isn't a like you did something wrong and you get fined or you get slapped. It's a let us try to figure out what's going on here. So
Glenn was in the stack.
yeah, and sorry, I didn't understand what stack meant. So go.
Oh, that
I
means
didn't
he's in the
either.
wait list
I'm
for
piling on to the big stack of people waiting to ask questions.
Go ahead, Glenn.
Thanks for this presentation and for all of your attempted sleuthing. I understand how difficult it is to get information out of the government, let alone impossible to get it out of private corporations. My question is, and maybe some of you know, has there been a study that shows how much it will cost to restore the river from the damage that the Northfield pump storage facility has caused? How much will it cost to remove all of the infrastructure in Northfield, to restore the mountain itself? And does First Light or Northfield LLC have the financial resources to complete a restoration project of the river, assuming that this facility, this river killing facility, does not get relicensed? And we should be organizing right now to make sure that the river doesn't get another 50-year death sentence. And that's my editorial part to the question, but I'd appreciate it if you'd let me know about the first part. Has a study been completed that shows how much it will cost to restore the damage that they have done?
So there were studies that were done that were on individual elements of their impacts, erosion, fish entrainment, impacts to dragonflies, how fluctuating water levels impacted access to tributaries for fish, all of these things, spawning in various parts of the river of different species. Some of the studies were better than others. And just take, for example, erosion. They spent about $1 million doing this model and concluded that their operations don't have impact on erosion. So, except for like a 200 feet stretch right across from the tail race. So they're proposing no further erosion work in the next 50 years. We have requested them to do a feasibility study to look at having a lower reservoir that's not the river. That would make it closed loop, or even maybe a partial closed loop that would be kind of a buffer. They've refused to look at that. FERC has not required it either. So, Glenn, I don't know if that answers your question, but there's.
Well, I guess what I'm really asking is, like, you know, Vermont Yankee shut down. They have a decommissioning plan. Does Northfield Mountain have a decommissioning plan to decommission the facility, clean up the mess that they've made? Otherwise, the taxpayers are going to be stuck paying the bill. Like,
Right.
for most dam removals, it ends up that the taxpayers, you know, these companies profit for 100 years, and then the taxpayers are left holding the bill. We should hold
Right.
this company, this investment, whatever the hell it is, we should hold them accountable to the cost and make sure that they have the resources necessary to restore our river back to a living system, because
Yeah.
they're killing it right now.
Yeah, and
So
we
Glenn,
have
that is
been
something-
planning to request a decommissioning fund for each of these facilities. FERC does not tend to want to require that, but we'll still keep pushing. But for example, there's a dam being removed in California that it ended up having to be taken over by the state. So it is frequently the public's money that has to deal with cleaning up these things.
Yeah, and sort of, I mean, there are right now a few federal laws being introduced. You know, Annie Custer in New Hampshire has been instrumental in this, trying to relook at the hydro in the country in general. And that is one of the questions that has come up, you know, for a period of time in FERC, and I forget if it was like the 80s, there was considerations of trying to start to think about decommissioning. There was just recently a comment period about, because of one of the dams failing on the west side of the country, there was a comment period about, you know, ensuring that these companies have the money to deal with situations like that. So, you know, to the extent that we can, we involve ourselves in those conversations as well. But right now, FERC does not require decommissioning study. We will continue to ask for it, but that's a major issue in our mind as well. Yeah, there should be a process for these things to be dealt with when they are no longer useful. I was going to see if there's other questions here in the chat. Eve, can you explain, Rick had asked, you know, what's the advantage to drawing the reservoir down? I responded in the chat, but can you explain about negative pricing and how they can make money when the prices go negative by pumping?
Yeah, and it's a complicated question, and this is what we really don't know actually, is what market they were bidding into and what function this was providing to the grid, because that's not public. But so normally prices go up and down every 5 minutes. And so normally Northfield will pump at night when demand is low, prices go down, and it generates, especially in the early morning and evening, when the thing that hydropower does better than almost any other kind of generation, with the exception of gas, is be able to come on and off quickly. And so the times when we have really sharp rises in electricity use normally are kind of early morning, when everyone's getting up and turning on their lights and getting things going, and in the evening when everyone comes home, especially as the sun goes down. So at those times is often when hydropower projects are selling electricity, or in the case of the dams, running their generators and the river is flowing. One is Northfield Pumping, is when the opposite happens. Supply from coal plants, from nuclear power plants stays steady all the time, 24/7, 365 days a year. Coal, it can vary actually, but nuclear is pretty much the same. So when supply goes down, you actually may have more supply than you need and prices go very low and Northfield can pump at those times. So that's often at like 2, 3, 4 in the morning. With solar power, in the spring, we have a real glut of solar power. Think about late May. It's not that hot yet. People don't have their AC on, but it's only a month away from the solstice. So there's a ton of sunlight, not that much electricity demand. And so you get a whole lot of extra supply in those afternoon hours. And then as the sun begins to go down, all of a sudden you need a lot more electricity. But when that sun is shining at 3 p.m. in the afternoon, there's way more electricity on the grid than we actually need. And prices can actually go negative because there's more supply than there is demand. And so when prices go negative, that's a great time for Northfield to pump. It can actually make money consuming electricity. So that could have been it. It could have been that Northfield bid, we're gonna pump when the energy price goes to this low height. That could have been it. I don't understand why it would have been this extreme since it must do that every day. So I've wondered about whether there was some other mechanism going on, whether there's some kind of negative demand response function where it can bid to actually suck up demand as opposed to reduce demand, whether there's something going on with the reserves market where it was called in to balance out what was going on the grid. You know, it's all just supposition, and it's just another illustration of, as much as I've spent 2 years trying to learn this stuff, there's just so much I still don't know.
So I just want to acknowledge we're at 10:38. Glad to continue talking, but we are over time. So I just want to say that. You know, Glenn, to your point, like people need to comment, like people really need to comment. I think you should fully call for decommissioning, making sure they have the money to decommission, and add that, you know, that will be included in our comments, but we really need people to comment because FERC needs to hear from everybody that this is what we're thinking, you know. So with that, I'll just say, you know, more questions?
There has been a discussion. I don't know if there's any lingering questions having to do with that, but there's been some sort of cross-chatting.
Yeah, I'll just chime in that the extremes happen actually all winter long. It's just they're not reported because you don't have boaters out, you don't have people recreating, and but those of us that live on the river, oh, we see it. Yeah, it goes very low at times.
Mm-hmm. And winter is a time where they make a lot of revenue because the natural gas prices are high as people need to heat their homes.
Yeah, that's for all of the facilities. Most of the revenue is made between November and you know, February, March, and it's a huge amount of revenue. And then those other months in between, the summer months, are much less. Elizabeth, you have your hand up.
Yes, how will we know when the public comment period opens?
2 ways. You can sign up directly on the FERC docket to get notices about the facilities that you're interested in, and there's instructions on how to do that on our website. You can also, you know, as people have joined us in these hydropower coffee hours and webinars, we are automatically adding you to what we call our hydropower email list. And so as soon as you know that there's a public comment period open, we will be putting that information out to anyone on that list, and probably put out a press release and reach out to towns and everything. So
great, thank you.
Yeah.
So
Kathy and I have been planning to put together template letters so that people can use those to form your comment letters and have it addressed to the right person and all that stuff. So we're chipping away at that during the summer and hopefully have that ready by the time they open up the comment period.
So people have been asking about whether I'll share the slides. I think I'm not comfortable doing that yet, but it'll be on this recording. So I would just ask you to use this recording for now. I'm planning on trying to write an academic article this year on the way that electric markets affect hydro peaking and what we're starting to call hydro pulling. So once that is out, then I could share that, but that'll be a little while coming.
I'll just throw in my final editorial comment, and that is that the Western Mass did a great job opposing pipelines a few years ago, and I know lots of folks were involved in that effort. It would be fantastic if we saw a similar effort focused on the river. I mean, this is a pipeline of life. It should be through all of our communities, and instead it's a pipeline of death right now. And it would be good if we could get the communities involved and the people and the activist organizations, a coalition of people, to really oppose another 50 years of this devastation for profit. Just, it's entirely for profit. There is no benefit. There's no public benefit. And these facilities never should have been taken out of the realm of a public utility when they're using the public's assets to operate like this. So that's my editorial comment, and I hope that I can look forward to some leadership from some of the river organizations to lead that effort, to be out front, organizing the communities. We don't want another 50 years of the same business as usual. Thank you.
We need all those voices, Glenn. Yeah, you know, we are doing the best we can, you know, just trying to stay on top of like understanding the details of this and responding formally. But there's one Andrea and there's one me, right? So it's like, hell yeah, man, bring it on. But we need all the voices and all the help we can get.
I want to give these guys credit because a lot of environmental groups really, like, they've been focusing on licensing stuff for years. They know that, you know, the Endangered Species Act, they know the water quality, all that kind of stuff. But to really try to get a handle on what's going on with the economics of the electric side, it's really just an uncommon thing that these guys are really doing and trying to understand.
Thanks, Eve. Yeah, and I think for my part, you know, I feel like you have to hold the vision and the dream and like iterate that for what you really want at the same time that you are responding in real time to like the actual transactions that are occurring. So you kind of have to do both. And that's why, you know, having multiple stakeholders involved is beneficial, right? Because you can play different roles in terms of like how you respond.
I'll be the wild-eyed radical.
Right behind you.
Thanks, Glenn. I definitely echo your sentiments, and I want to thank the Conservancy for being an intervener early on. I know, you know, we've all worked on this since like 2013 when we took on intervener status and the FERC relicensing. So amazing how long this thing has gone on. And yeah, I even brought that up in 2013 when this first started, Glenn, which it was, you know, the system lock-in of 50 years, considering the changes that are happening in markets, and especially with climate change, it seems absolutely ridiculous that we need flexibility in our energy markets and not locking in for 50 years. My suggestion back then was to do 2025 at the most. So yeah, thanks.
Thank you all.
All right, any other lingering questions before we break off and move on with our days?
Oh, wanted to say thank you very much. It was wonderful to have such a cogent presentation from Eve of an incredibly convoluted situation. Also good to see Christine there. Kathy and Andrea, I'm going to try to probably pester you folks offline after the meeting. I thought about asking you to stay on to talk about comment letter, I'm still working on for regional planning commissions up and down the river. So heads up, I'll probably be pestering you later and not keep everyone involved. So,
Fine, John.
Okay, sounds good.
so thank you, thank you. Keep up the hydropower coffee hour.
Great
Well,
to
this is
see
our
you, John.
last one that's currently scheduled. We need to crank out these, you know, example letters and stuff. So we'll be focusing on that, but we may have more as time goes on. We don't know yet. Thank you for
Alrighty.
coming to them.
Oh, always a pleasure. All right.
All right, thanks everybody. Stay
Thank
in touch
you.
if you have other questions or comments. Really appreciate your involvement in as this continues to go, hopefully to the finish line in the next couple of years.
You optimist. All right. Thank
All right.
you.
Thanks all. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Is it just us? Oh, we've got a couple still.
Bill, you want to stay to talk about your question? Bill's being shy.
Deborah, Terry, any lingering question, or should we log you out?
Maybe they all left. They went to
Yeah,
get
maybe.
coffee.
Bill was asking me questions. We work with Bill a lot. He's works with NOAA. He was asking questions about like the other end of the scale, the really small hydros. They have like limited money, but they have to meet, you know, they meet FERC's comprehensive development standard, and just, you know, the weird disparate situation of these really huge hydroelectric projects and then the smaller ones. So
Yeah, don't know anything about them. Except that they may, some of them are eligible for RECs in a way, so that, but that's the only thing that I know.
yeah. All right. Well, I know Andrea and I have